Welcome to Hyper Live, and today our special guest Sam Ziegler. Welcome, Sam, and looking forward to hearing a bit more about the future of AI and voice and FoxEQ, who you're working with at the moment. But yeah, welcome, and Daniel, of course, co-host. But maybe Sam, I'll pass over to you. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Sam Ziegler. I am currently a principal engineer with VoxEQ, which is an AI company with a model which can determine someone's physical characteristics based on the sound of their voice. So with a recording of the voice, it can produce information about their age and their birth sex and various other things. And it's a startup based out of the US, and I've been working there for about a year and a half. And before that, I've been doing lots of startups in Silicon Valley for about 30 years, and I newly moved to New Zealand.
Yeah, fantastic. Daniel, do you want to introduce yourself? And then I'm very curious to hear more.
Yeah, g'day everyone. So it's Daniel Walters, the founder of Great CTO, and I also am an associate consultant working often with Hyper. Yeah, we've been collaborating on our AI assisted development course, and we've got multiple cohorts running at the moment. So we might mention a little bit more about that at the end of today's chat. But yeah, I'm interested not just in the AI aspects of VoxEQ, but the overall, range of use cases that this business is tackling. So, should we start there? Should we start with how some
Sure.
of your customers are using it?
Yeah, let me give a quick background on the company and how we sort of got here, and then I can I think that'll be a good transition into the use cases. So the company was founded by two people, one of which was actually a university friend of mine who I went to school with many, many, many years ago at this point, who's been an AI researcher pretty much this whole time. He started out in mostly vision research, computer vision research, and before transitioning into other things. And so he has been working on this model for a few years now. And there's lots of interesting research out there with regards to what information you can extract from voice. Because when you think about a voice, the sound of a voice and the features and dynamic nature of it is based purely in someone's physicality, right? Like my voice sounds the way it does because my vocal cords are shaped a certain way. My body physicality is a certain way. The micro movements of my muscles are a certain way, and so all those things factor into the creation of a voice, right? And so the goal of the model is to try and extract different types of information or correlate that the voice, the tenor of a voice or the textures of a voice to the associated physical attributes. So, and when you think about it, it's like when you call someone on the phone and you hear their voice, just by hearing their voice, you can tell or at least you can get a sense of physical things about them, right? You can sometimes get a sense of how old they are. You can get a sense of what their birth sex is. Like you can get a sense of different things about them by just hearing their voice, because people have different voices for different reasons. Even beyond the physicality, then you throw in, language aspects to it and where you were born and all sorts of things all feed into why you sound the way you do, right? There's a lot of there's a huge number of use cases to this, and so I've been doing startups for a long time, and one thing I always look for in a startup is the ability to pivot the technology. Because if you go down one road, you say, here's my products, here's my technology, I'm going to go down this road, and if it doesn't work, if you don't have a way to pivot that into something else, then you're sort of done. So it's always nice to have a company when you're a startup where you can take the same technology and apply it to different things and different markets. And so so right now we've been focused solely on the aspects of the voice that we've been focused on are age, birth sex, and speaker identification. So basically, if you so that if I hear one voice, I can compare it to another voice and tell you if that's the same person. So you could create a voice print of a voice that to compare it for other things. So that's so those are sort of the three aspects. But there's a whole bunch of aspects. Like there's been research about there's potential use for medical use cases. Like if you have throat cancer, that will affect your voice, right? Or if you have something, you potentially have some issues with your lungs, that could affect the sound of your voice. So, and there's weight, height, any physical characteristic you can think of, you can imagine that being somewhere encoded in the sound of someone's voice. So the use cases that we're focused on currently are we call there's three products we have identified. One's called Verify, which the idea there is for fraud detection for financial institutions. So, for example, if I'm calling up a bank or a credit union or whoever, that bank knows how old I am, what my birth sex is, and potentially if I've called before, they potentially have a voice print from a previous call. So if I call up I'm calling, I call into the customer service thing and say I want to transfer $1 million from my bank account somewhere else, right? And the first thing you hear is like, "Thank you for calling such and such a bank. Why are you calling?" And then you start talking. And so we can take that, with a few seconds of voice, we can say, okay, we think this person. We feed the model, and the model say, I think this person is 24 years old and a woman, right? And the bank can look at their records and say, even before a customer service agent even picks up the phone and say, hey, we think this person's supposed to be 80 years old and a man. it raises red flags, right? So, and banks, for example, they have all sorts of different levels of fraud detection. And so the idea is this is just another layer, because AI models are not flawless. They have a percentage of success rate and percentage of failure rate, but it may cause more questions to be asked, right? And if you compare two voices, if you have a voice print and the new person calls in and the voice prints don't match, that doesn't mean you immediately reject them and be like, you're not who you're saying. But it means you probably want to ask more questions, because fraud is all about how much money are you willing to spend to prevent how much potential fraud, right? And so that's one whole use case, right? Another whole use case is what we call persona, which is what call centers are increasingly want to do these days. So this is not just for banks; this is for any type of call center. Is they want to provide better customer service by associating specific agents who are good at certain things with specific customers who want certain things. So, for example, you may be able to know that this agent here is really good for dealing with people in their 20s, right? Whereas this agent here but they're really bad at dealing with people in their 60s, right? So you would want to route the people in the 20s to that agent, but not the people, maybe you have some agents over here that are good at other things, right? And this is just a broad example, but the idea is, so the idea with that is that you give, when you call up and you talk, we give here's a persona of this person. You can route your call based on that, right? And then the third aspect is and again, you can tell all these are sort of in the vein of customer service, but there's obviously other in call centers. But the third one we call is prompt. So another thing with customer service and call centers is they increasingly want AI agents, like automated agents, right? So either text agents or voice. Eventually we'll see more and more voice agents, right? So what we do is we provide a string based on the sound of someone's voice that describes the person, so that you can see the LLM with that information, so that the LLM will provide communication more appropriate for that person, right? Like, if it's a 20-year-old, you tell the LLM respond to this person like they're a 20-year-old, or versus respond to this person they're an 80-year-old, the LLM, because LLMs do their thing, will actually produce different output based on what you tell it, right? And so that's again, to provide a better customer support. You can seed the LLM with this information so that the responses are more appropriate for the person who's making the call.
That's really cool, actually. And I know that you're your company is taking a very kind of ethical view around the use of this data as well, which I think is really interesting. But do you want to explain a little bit, because obviously this is personal information about people that's being used to help them, but how does that work in terms of the way you think about that?
Yeah, yes, so AI ethics is a big part of it. Certainly our co-founder Chris, who's our AI expert, is very AI ethics is extremely important to him, and making sure that is we take a very ethical approach to that. And so the first thing we do is from our perspective, we don't we store nothing. We persist nothing that's we have data streams that come in, but we make sure we never persist anything in that. We either in our logs or anywhere, because we just do processing, right? We just take this input stream. When we're done with it, we throw it out, and then we just say, here's the result. This is what we think, right? So, we make sure, because we look at it as our customers, it's their responsibility, because these are, most of our customers are financial institutions who also take privacy extremely seriously. So we want to, for both our customers' standpoint and for the user standpoint. And the other things, we don't also use any of, obviously we don't use any of our customer data for training or anything. It's just just fed to the model. There's a bunch of numbers, and the model spits out some numbers, and that's the end of it. So
yeah, that's very cool. And can you share a little bit more in terms of how this works from a technical perspective, but also
sure.
How accurate are these? Is this analysis?
I mean, the accuracy depends on what you're talking about. Like, for example, it's the accuracy of a male versus female is very high, because that is actually a pretty easy to do. The age is pretty accurate with it, but there's an uncertainty associated with it, can be 5, it can be low as like 3 years, it can be as high as like 10 years, which is sort of the first standard deviation away from the prediction, right? So it depends completely on the voice and that sort of thing. So it's and then the speaker ID is actually also very, very accurate. I think it's in general for this, we try the goal we try to do is a 3% false positive rate, and that's the way the model is, because again, you can train. I'm not I can only speak in broad strokes about the details of the training, because AI training is not my field of expertise. But the models are trained with a certain level of expectation of what the failure rate is, right? And then there's a trade-off between the failure rate and the false positive rate and the false negative rate. So like, you can, if you want to like decrease your false negatives, you may increase false positives, right? Or if you want to make sure you have a very low level of false positives, you may increase the false negatives, right? So again, it's all statistical and in nature. And that's why the main thing is is communicating that this is a statistical model, because you don't want there's a lot of customer expectation management with regards to saying, like, this is not like a silver bullet fraud detection system, right? It's a statistical thing, and AI's models have failed. Again, everyone should get real into their head that AI models are not perfect, and they have a statistical chance of success and failure, right? So the main thing is to provide again, because like let's take fraud for example, right? Like, the running a model for our models is fairly cheap, right? But if you have to do, like, let's say if you really want to verify a person who they are, you would have, the best thing you would do is you would send somebody over to their house and say, all right, let's see your IDs, but that would be really expensive, and so you wouldn't want to do that unless there was a lot of money on the line, right? But so there's gradations, right? So it's and that's the thing. So we just are part of this balancing act between how much are you willing to spend to verify that is who they say they are, or authorized to what they say they are, versus what's the cost of failure, right? And that's what you have to really think about when you're doing these things.
All of this resonates. I worked with Experian for 7 years, and so in addition to running the credit bureaus, they have divisions dedicated to address quality, decision analytics. So all of these are going into scoring, essentially these fraud algorithms that you're talking about. And as you say, they do layer up. So there's not one thing, but when it crosses a threshold, then it might make the recommendation, hey, you might want to cease transactions on this account until you've got some additional verification. And as consumers, we experience it where, so we might be doing something out of the ordinary. We're traveling overseas, then we go to use the credit card, and then your phone lights up, and it's funny. Like sometimes you go like, that was very inconvenient. It meant I couldn't do something, but I find that the algorithms are getting so good that it's like, yeah, I was doing something weird. I was doing something out of the ordinary, and I'm glad that they stopped the chance of like, that could have been someone misusing my credit card. So yeah, it's just been an interesting trend.
Yeah, like a lot of our customers are thinking also along the lines of like also different levels of fraud detection based on what the activity is, right? Like if you just want to check your account balance, that's a different level of risk compared to I want to transfer $1 million, please. And so that may take you down different detection pathways, and you're willing to spend more money on the I want to transfer $1 million, please, versus the can I just check my account balance.
I had a question around what can be detected. Can it detect also stress in the voice?
Yeah, I mean that's certainly part of it too. That like mental state is there's a research again. Chris, the CTO, is the one who's read all the research papers and done his own additional research as well. So he could give you a much different breakdown of all the different things, but that was certainly one of them. Again, like country of origin. I mean, like if you're born in a certain area, you can usually tell based on your accent, right? And so there's a whole bunch of things. Like just imagine what you can tell about someone by just hearing their voice. I mean, sometimes and again, even people, like sometimes you think, oh, that sounds like someone, I imagine this person in my head, and you meet the person like, wow, they're nothing like that. But like we had a cool demo earlier on that we don't really use as much anymore. We called it the license driver's license demo, where you would get a recording of someone's voice, and it would spit out an image of a hypothetical driver's license for that person, including their, because on a driver's license, you'll have birthday and birth sex and have a little picture. And we'd actually include a little picture of what that person would theoretically look like based on, the like place of origin, right?
That's very cool. Yeah.
I liked your comment earlier, Sam, around startups. So you mentioned when you're sort of assessing when to join a startup that you look at the potential of the technology it's investing in to be pivoted, which I just thought was such a great insight. A lot of people talk about outcomes over outputs, but for startups, before you've found your market fit, sometimes the order of operations goes in a different direction. So yeah, I'd love to hear more about your thoughts on this.
Yeah, I mean, I've done lots of startups, and I always I'm a high risk, high reward kind of guy, and so I would always try and get in as early as possible. So I went through a lot of companies that lasted 6 to 12 months after the first round of funding ended, right? And that makes you take hard looks at what you're doing, and that so I have a whole mental list of things that I started looking at. But I mean, flexibility, pivotability is really important, because the one thing you can't get back from startups is your time, right? Like if you invest, money, money comes and goes. You can always, there's tons of investors out there, but you as a person doing startups, you have so much time in your life, right? And so and very frequently you're wrong about the market, right? You could be right about the technology, but and you might be too early to the market, you might be too late to the market, you might find, the market wasn't willing to spend as much money as you thought. So then you have like, but there's this market over here, which again, I can just if with little tweaks to my stuff, I can start move that direction. And again, it's still not easy because you still have to do if you're going from one market to another, you have to redo all your marketing, you have to redo all your product definition, you have to hire the salespeople for that market. But at least then you can do it as opposed to, because there's a lot of companies where they're one-trick ponies, right? They're like, I have an idea for an app, right? This app does a thing. And then if they invest a bunch of money to market the app and the market for every reason doesn't work, and it's like, oh, well,
that's it.
Nothing else we could do with it. It didn't. The thing didn't work. So
Yeah.
for a where you want to invest your time doing startups, it's which is not to say again, successful startups don't have to have a pivotal technology. But for me, as someone who is deciding where to spend their time, that's part of it. It's like de-risking. Like what happened was, it's interesting. Maybe it's been, I find it interesting. So what happened was, at one point I realized that one of my biggest weaknesses when it comes to doing startups is I was always, when I tried to do my own startups, I was always too early to market, right? Because I see markets too far ahead. And market timing is such a crucial part of startups, right? You can have the best idea and the best implementation, the best product definition, and you go to market, and then the market's not ready. Then like 2 years later, someone does the exact same thing, and it was wildly successful because the market was ready, right? So, at one point I realized that, okay, there's stuff I'm bad at and there's stuff I'm good at, right? So, and part of it is, so I know I'm not good at identifying market timing. So I was like, okay, well, I'm going to start looking at startups instead of like as someone with my own ideas. I'm going to start looking at this as an investor, right? Where I'm going to be like, I'm not investing my money, I'm investing my time. So what I'm saying is, like, I'm going to look at this. I'm going to look at the best ideas I see out there and pick the best one I can find, right? That has the least amount of red flags, which is exactly what investors do. Like, investors see thousands of pitch decks a month. They find the best one. It's not like they're like, they find the one that has the least number of problems and they pick that one. And so like, team dynamics are super important. The market is super important. Are these the right people to go after the market, and what makes this company special versus another company that's doing the exact same thing? Like VoxyQ, with VoxyQ, not only is it a very pivotal technology, my friend Chris, who's the co-founder, he's been doing AI research for 30 years, and he is the world's expert at this. So, like, if you wanted to start another company, you would need Chris, but Chris already has a company. So you would have to basically redo all his research from scratch, right? So, these are all things that are really important. Not so much, they don't guarantee successful of a startup, and they aren't required for a startup to be successful. But as someone who's trying to pick a place to work, it's really important to try and minimize those, minimize the red flags, or at least understand what the bet you're making is.
I think it certainly resonates with me. I remember when early days of Hyper, we co-produced a program with Callahan Innovation called Build for Speed, and we run it with over 200 software product companies now. And I must have personally done at least sort of 40 or 50 of those with my colleague Rick. And you can exactly the same patterns are the flags that you're talking about, right? So when you walk in and start working with people, you can tell very quickly if there's an open-mindedness, if there's a learning culture. You can tell if there's a balance with the leadership in terms of technology versus the business side. And over the years, the ones that we scored quite highly and that had that balance are all of the ones that have been far more successful. So certainly it really does resonate with me, Sam, as well.
There's an AI connection here as well. So I am coming across a lot of AI startups where people have seen the tools and the APIs and what's available and gone, wow, it's going to be so easy for me to, or for our company to go and build, this idea I have. And I say that is a red flag. When it's become so easy, because all of the technologies you're going to use are commoditized. You have no moat, and there are almost definitely at least 50, maybe more, other companies around the world who have had exactly the same dumb idea that you've had, and are probably going to execute on it better, or realize that there's just no moat, and nothing that they can actually protect. So yeah, I'm seeing that pattern increase at the moment.
Yeah, the special sauce doesn't even have to be engineering or technology. Like for example,
Mhm.
at my previous startup that I was a co-founder of, um, uh, we had special sauce that was a technology, but also one of my co-founders who was the VP of product, his previous company was a technology marketing company whose biggest customer was American Airlines, right? And so he had a pre-existing relationship with American Airlines, and specifically to the division that we would want to sell to. So, like at the time, American Airlines, I think it's maybe still is the largest airline in the world, and so they were our first customer as a startup. And the only reason we were able to do that is because he had a pre-existing 10-year relationship with American Airlines. So if he didn't have him, and so once we sold the biggest airline, it was a lot easier to sell a lot of the smaller airlines because we're like, well, we sold American, and so like. So that's my point, is that like the special sauce doesn't have to necessarily be technology. It was like
Yeah.
having a sales guy who can call up the CEO of the big company that you want to sell to, and the big that could be the differentiator too, right? Like, and
The relationship.
so it could be, yeah, it can be related. It can be, and it could be, if it's a sales company, that it can be, again, your head of sales has a Rolodex that no one else in the world has. If it's
Mhm.
marketing, I have, there's marketing companies where, so again, I sort of break companies down to sales companies and marketing companies as their revenue drivers, right? Either you have huge sales teams that are doing direct sales to, where you're doing lead generation, and all the sales team are doing actual sales, and then you have like marketing based companies where the revenue is driven by marketing, where you have a subscription service for $10 a month, so you don't have any sales staff, but you have marketing people that are trying to get people in the door and sign up, right? So the marketing, like I know this one guy who's an entrepreneur, successful entrepreneur, but his focus has always been marketing, and because he knows his marketing space better than anybody, like he knows how to market to that space, and and can nail it, right? So it's the special sauce. My basic thing is, a lot of people, when people talk about the special sauce of companies, they like think about defensible technology, but it doesn't even have to be
Mhm.
technology. It can be personnel and experience. So
Mhm.
Mm,
100%.
mm. Yeah, it reminds me of uh, Keely's, the 10 types of innovation, and his messaging is kind of the same. He studied uh, many organizations over over a long period of time, over about 100 years, I believe, and tried to distill the different types of innovation that have occurred historically. And yeah, it's like you're saying, Sam. It's it can be the thing that you build, whether it's software or physical, but then there's also the way in which you build it and the way you take it to market. And it's never one of those things. And the most successful organizations are usually the ones that have multiple forms of innovation that combine to create that sort of moat or that defensible position. But yeah.
People might want to check out our previous episode on Wardley mapping. So I've really found that approach helpful to sort of map out everything that's going on in your environment, and in particular looking for where there may be friction for progress that your competitors are struggling with, so that if you have a path forward and using any of the levers that we've just described that may be able to get past that friction, then that might be representative of your moat or your advantage. So yeah, but it's an interesting space, because I find people give context-free advice, like outcomes over outputs. I'm an outcomes guy. My blog was called Focus on Outcomes, but you know there's always a context, and it's always very interesting to look at startup context versus enterprise context as a stark a stark difference. They're very different situations, and yeah, a lot of startups, they'll go, let's hire the top talent from these big enterprises, and then wonder what goes wrong when people take all their enterprise context and apply it straight into the startup, and it just doesn't quite work.
Yeah, a buddy of mine who's one of the most successful entrepreneurs that's a personal friend of mine. He had a 3-point test for startups, which I always liked. First is the first question is it a product? Like, is what you're talking about actually a product? Like, is this something that someone might even theoretically pay money for, or that it fulfills some need that's out there, right? Second question is it a company? Like, let's say hypothetically, if you were to build this product and be able to get it out in the market, will more money come in than that's going out? Basically, can you make a profitable company out of this? And then the third question is it a startup? Right? There's a whole bunch of products which can be done as in a large company that startups just can't do. Right? Like, if you're Google, you can say, we're going to bet $10 billion on artificial, making self-driving cars, right? Or we're going to build, right? When you start up, you're like, well, how many coins are in the couch over there that we can scrape together, right? And so, because there's a lot of things that even if it's a company, you can't do as a startup, right? And then we haven't even talked about execution. This is just like whether it's a viable startup. But to me, then it's execution is where most startups go to die, right? Like, even if you nail everything there, and to me, it's always been about the thing I've seen that kills startups more than anything is bad team dynamics, right? Where you just, especially if the founding team doesn't gel quickly and immediately and have a good dynamic, and that kills companies. Because what I find very interesting about almost all organizations is that whoever creates the organization, that dynamic almost never goes away for the history of the organization. So, like, if you have let's say a sales guy, sales founder, and a marketing founder, and they don't like each other, and you'll find in that organization, the sales teams and marketing teams will never like each other, and will have because once that dynamic is put in place, if there's distrust between two organizations at the founder level, then they hire the people beneath them, and they're going to hire people who believe what they believe, and because they want to work with people that agree with them, and that sort of populates down, and then the people who work for them know, okay, this person, the founder doesn't like that founder, so I better watch myself when interacting with their team, because I don't want to lose my job, right? So
I've seen that very thing, Sam, and to the extent that I was working with a company in Asia, and the product and engineering folks, the product and engineering leaders didn't really get on and see eye to eye, and it ended up in the product people being hired in one country and the engineering people being hired in another country, and this really kind of terrible sort of relationship between the two, which I think kind of was pretty much terminal to the business in the end. But they were at one point valued at over $500 million. But so it's amazing, isn't it, that these things can kind of persist. So what's your if you sorry, Daniel, if you think a little bit further ahead, so where would you go if you were looking to create a product using AI at the moment, in terms of, are there any particular areas that you're sort of ahead of the market with the technology, or is it everybody playing catch up at the same time?
Are you talking about theoretical? Like, do I have any theoretical product ideas, AI product ideas that have been working through my head? Is that what your question is, Garth? I'm not quite sure what the question is.
Yeah, that's right. Or any areas, particularly like any AI technologies that you think could be, the right one of the right ingredients for a product company.
Yeah, I mean, I honestly haven't been thinking much about it. Like, I just where I'm in my life, my startup brain has sort of turned off a little bit, and that I'm enjoying, because right now I'm enjoying, like, I've started my own companies and done a whole, thought about that, a lot of that stuff in the past. So I've been thinking about it in broad strokes more than specifics, because I have a very strong sense for when things are hype and not hype, when it comes to technology. Again, like I called the hype train on AR and VR and 3D TV. Like, there's been old technologies that people spent billions of dollars on, where I'm like, this is a complete waste of time. Like blockchain was a complete waste of time. So the thing about AI is that AI is not, it's overhyped, and there's certainly a bubble that's going to pop soon, I think, in the next couple of years with regards to that. But there's a lot of reality to AI. The AI is not a hype train in the same sense that AR and VR is, where they spent billions of dollars on and came out with literally nothing. There's, the productivity gains are good, or for real, right? Like, again, I use in my development, I use ChatGPT all day, every day, to just help. It helps my productivity. Like, I get more stuff done because I can just ask ChatGPT to help me with something, and it does, and I'm like, oh, that helps. I mean, to be fair, it also has sent me down some blind alleys, but no different than blind alleys I may have gone down on my own, volition too. But so that's the thing, is that it's real. I think what people are starting to, why the bubble is going to pop is like, I was just listening something about, I'm sorry, I'm blanking on Sora is the OpenAI video app, right? Is it that? Like, for example, like I saw a quote from Sam Altman, which was like, basically that they're screwed with that. Like, they're like, wait, people are creating all these videos that aren't making any money. And it's like, well, yeah, that's the internet. Like, what are you talking about? And so, so there's, and I mean, AI models, the thing that's unique, what's interesting about them compared to pretty much any other software that jumps to mind, consumer grade software these days, is that they're expensive to run. A single not, it's still, we're talking cents, but still, like, cents times millions is a lot of money. Whereas, like, if you're talking database stuff, or, the vast majority of stuff out there, right, is I have a database with information in it. Some request comes in, I tweak the data, and I present different things back, right? Like, maybe YouTube's got to store a lot of data. I mean, that's the other thing, is unless you're storing a lot of data, everything is cheap in computing these days, right? Like, you can do millions of transactions for a couple cents, right, with the whole cloud computing stuff, right? Whereas the AI models are expensive to run. Like, even our voice model, which is a very simple model, is compared to all other computing, is expensive to run. It takes seconds of processor time, which compared to milliseconds of processor time, right? And so right now, all these use cases are being subsidized by investment, right? So they can hide the actual cost versus how much people are willing to pay on it by spending, throwing billions of dollars at it, and be like, okay, we'll see what happens, right? And I think actually Bezos gave a interesting lecture. I saw a slip of so he was talking about this as well the other day, where like, there's going to be a bubble, it's going to pop, and all the useless things where the cost is way out of line with, like, Sora, that's just that's never going to make money, right? And then you have all the copyright issues, and they're going to be sued to oblivion. But that's it. So that'll all disappear. But the real apps, the real use cases will shine through, and there will be lots of them.
Yeah, and we'll delve into for a minute talking about AI assisted software development, because you mentioned using ChatGPT. That's one that we definitely feel like, even if the foundational providers go under, what's out there in open source already has changed, the workflow of software development forever. But yeah, just one comment on the Sora one. I agree with you in terms of its public use, although I'm sure it will find a niche. But those video models are being used in Hollywood productions already. I know a few, Hollywood graphic artists, and these things are already plugged into their pipelines. So I mean, there's a revenue stream that is already being exercised there.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, Sam?
Certainly. I was just been the SOAR, as you mentioned, as the consumer grade app, right? That's
Right.
that's what I said. There are for real use cases for things like this, and what's going to happen is when the bubble bursts, that those things will shine through for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So tell us about your development and use of AI.
Yeah. So I tend to, again, I tend to use AI as specifically ChatGPT, and the reason we use ChatGPT is mostly for indemnification purposes, because they will indemnify you against any lawsuits stemming from someone claiming you stole their IP. I don't tend to use it that way. Again, I use it, again, I use when I use ChatGPT, it's in a very targeted way. I like to describe it as I use it as my research assistant. Whereas, like, I know, like, if I know I want to do a thing, and I know, like, I'm using this particular library, and I know there's a function in this library to do a thing, and I don't, like, if I normally, before ChatGPT, I would go find the doc online, read through it, trying to figure out the API, and then, all right, here's how I use it and stuff like that. But now I'll just go to ChatGPT and say, hey, how do I do this with this API? It'll spit out 2 or 3 lines of code, and I'll be like, oh, okay, that's how I that's what does that. And so that's the primary use case I use for it, is like simple code generation for an API where I already know. And the reason why that's so effective for me is because I know it exists. I vaguely know what the function's called, and I just don't want to have to bother go looking it up, right? So it turns a 5 to 10 minute task into a 10-second task, right? And then I can glance at the result and know immediately if it's right or wrong, right? So so that saves me a bunch of time. The more sophisticated use case for ChatGPT is when I don't know exactly what I'm doing, like, and a lot of times it's interesting. I find, like, I've been doing a lot of TypeScript recently, and TypeScript TypeScript is extremely helpful and extremely annoying at the same time, because it's a huge hack, and so most of the times when you're doing things, it works great, no problems. But then when you try to do some specific things, I bang my head. Maybe it's just me, but it feels like I'm just banging my head against the wall consistently, and to try and figure out. I'm like, this should be really easy to do, but it's really hard. And so with things like that, like, a lot of times I'll use ChatGPT to try and help me. But the trouble is, then a lot of that's been really beneficial at times and really detrimental at times, because when it's things where I don't like that, where I don't know the answer, and I'm trying to get it to help me get to the answer, sometimes it'll just send me down these blind alleys where I'm like, oh, it says this. It seems like for reading the docs, that sounds about right. But then when I try it, I'll spend hours doing it. I'm like, that was just completely wrong. I just wasted hours of my life trying to go, because ChatGPT was delusional. But on the other side, I found that it's useful. A lot of times it's things that I'll say it as a side. It's not a lot of times, like, I forget the examples of. I could go look up examples. I'm sorry I didn't prep for this specific question, but, like, there was an example a couple of weeks ago where I didn't know. I was trying to do a thing, and I was talking to chat. I was working with ChatGPT, and then as an aside, it said something. Oh, but there's you can also do this with this library. Then I was like, oh wait, that's a much better way. Like, that didn't even occur to me. I didn't know you could do it. And then I was like, oh, I'll just do that. And it wasn't like, even in that case, it wasn't like ChatGPT was saying that's the right answer. It was more just like, here's some additional information. And I was just like, wow, that addition, like, I didn't know that. And that additional information is exactly what I wanted. So even in that case where ChatGPT was wrong, or at least suboptimal, it just happened to bring up a bit of information that made me realize, oh, that's the optimal way to do it, right? And so I find that's happened several times, where it's not like ChatGPT has gotten me the answer, but it's triggered something in my brain, or mentioned something that has made me realize what the right answer is. So that's the way.
Yeah, I think I've had that experience too, Sam. It's almost like it's this sort of more tangential search mechanism that, if you have enough expertise, when you spot an interesting answer, you can combine it in different ways, which is really powerful. So yeah, interesting
Mm.
to hear you've had those experiences too.
Yeah, we've
Well,
had a lot of guests mention something similar. We're about that time, aren't we, Gareth?
we are about that time. So thanks, Sam. This was like we've covered a much broader range of topics than I thought we might, but it was fascinating to hear, and especially fascinating to hear about VoxEQ and the work that you're doing there with the team and the success you're having, and quite a specific application of AI around voice matching. But yeah, it made me think I've got some ideas we can talk about there as well now. But yeah.
Hey Sam,
Uh,
is there any way that people can find out more about VoxEQ or get in touch with you that you'd like us to share?
Yeah, well, the company is just VoxEQ. That's VoxEQ.ai. That's has all the information there. I've sort of gotten out of social media, so I don't really pay attention to anything. So unless you got my email address or phone number,
I only had your LinkedIn.
I'm on
site.
LinkedIn. You can if you want to catch me up on LinkedIn. I don't pay a lot of attention to it, but I find my life is much less stressful when I don't think about social media.
Yeah.
That's a healthy way to be.
Cool.
But thanks, guys. I really appreciate it. Good chat.
Yeah, thanks so much, Sam. And
Thanks,
yeah,
Sam.
very interesting. And yeah, look forward to another chat sometime soon.
All right. See you guys.